Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Corey, better known as the Seaman, and I want to welcome you to another edition of the Seaman's Cinema Sit Down. Typically, I try to do these things outside of the theater, but my phone has been not working great, and I left my camera here, and I wanted to think about this one a little bit more, because I think I might have been a little too high coming out, because this is one of the movies where, like, it starts off so strong, and the middle is good, but you can see where it's lacking and how it could have been great. And the third act kind of starts to win you back and then really ends on a note that, like, for me, worked really well and had me pretty high coming out. And yeah, also going in. Come on. No, but anyway, I had a pretty fun time with this movie, but I definitely didn't. I wanted to give it its due justice and think about it a little bit while I drove home. Now, I am home 15 minutes later, and we're getting ready to dive into it. What are we talking about? Why don't you pull up a chair, take a seat? We are getting ready to dive in, spoiler-free, into Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And I was very excited about this movie. I'm a huge Indiana Jones fan. I grew up watching these movies all the time with my parents. It's one of the earliest, like, movies or franchises that I remember, like, watching with both my parents. Both my parents were big Indiana Jones fans, and if I was home on a Saturday and Dad was around and Indiana was on, we were watching it. If I was home on a Saturday and Mom was around and Indiana was on, we were watching it. If everybody was around, we were watching it. And that, like, for me, I've said this multiple times, there were 3 trilogies that were just always on TBS, usually WB or Pix 11. It changed a bunch of times over the years, but it was Indiana Jones, it was Star Wars, and it was Back to the Future. And like I said, the Indiana Jones, that was, like, just something I always remembered watching with my parents, and was where I really fell in love with Harrison Ford. While I love Star Wars and I love Han Solo, it was probably because I saw Indiana Jones first, and I love those movies so much. Like, those first 3 are it's one of the perfect trilogies in my world. They do everything you want. And people who Temple of Doom, I get it probably doesn't age the best, but I always dug Temple of Doom, man. And the one thing too that I always loved about the indie movies, there was, like, a little bit of horror in all of them, and that's the one thing that I think is been missing since the original trilogy. And here too, there's not quite enough horror to what's going on with some of the things, which, would have been a little bit closer to what I grew up with. But what I think this movie does that Crystal Skull doesn't is it feels like an Indiana Jones movie the entire time you're watching it. And it's a good time. Like, I had fun with this movie. Where it gets kind of tough for me is you see the potential. Like, this one could have been right in that same landing zone as those first 3, but I think it finds its way more into a landing zone similar to Crystal Skull. I definitely think it's better. It leaves a better taste in your mouth. You walk away way more satisfied than Crystal Skull, and I even think it plays with the idea of historical fiction better than Crystal Skull did, because, like, aliens, that's always been my big thing. Like, Crystal Skull is not great, but it has more redeeming qualities than I think people give it credit for in the first 2 acts, and in the third act it falls apart. For me, from a narrative standpoint. Here, you're presented a MacGuffin that, has a historical fiction base and does have kind of a supernatural element to it, which felt very in tune. This one feels more in tune to the original trilogy. But this does take a really big swing I don't know will land for everybody. And while aliens, I think, are a big no-no, the thing that I was most worried about with this movie was, and mild spoilers, but this has pretty much been out there, the Dial of Destiny was going to have something to do with time. And that kind of felt like it was in that zone of Crystal Skull where you're like, oh, you're playing with things that, like, yeah, there's supernatural elements, but, like, that's maybe a bit of a stretch. I think the one thing that the script does really, really well, I bought everything about this Dial of Destiny, and I thought it worked very similarly to the, historical pieces that Indy is after in the first 3 movies. But, that being said, like I said, this movie is a bit of an emotional roller coaster, so let's reset. Let's start with the first act, and specifically the prologue. The way this movie opens, you couldn't have given me anything that was more Indiana Jones than that opening sequence. And it was one of these things where, like, while I was watching it, knowing that, like, the reviews have not been stellar, I was sitting there going, oh man, is this gonna be one of them scenarios where I'm going, if we would have just made the prologue the whole movie, we probably would have had a big winner on our hands. Fortunately, I don't feel that way. I think the movie works quite well, and the prologue does a wonderful job of setting just about everything up that we need, and really connecting to the present in Indy's time, which we're in the 60s, right around the moon landing. So, like, the prologue really does flow quite well into where the movie generally takes place. And the other thing that works really, really, really well sometimes, but also not great other times, and the fact that, like, we can de-age Harrison Ford's face, but we can't, or they didn't, not that we can't, you can definitely play with audio, they didn't try to de-age his voice at all. It takes you out of the illusion a little bit. But when you can get past the wonkiness of the de-aging stuff and the voice, a lot of the de-aging stuff, like, I was sitting there, I was like, shit, man, that's like Indiana Jones from the original trilogy, just right here in front of us, man. And some of it is really good. But like I said, ultimately, the prologue really sets up and launches us into the first act that, again, I think really works quite well. We're seeing this older Indy, someone who's a little bit more down and out, and something that I think vibes with Ford. You know, it's one of these things where, of the characters he's played, I feel like Indy is the character that he has the most connection to, and I feel like you can always feel him wanting Indy to land where it needs to land so that the audience is satisfied and you know, gets their Indy fix. And seeing an older version of that, even if he is a little bit more gruffer and not as upbeat as Indy sometimes was, it feels natural because I think Ford and Indy are very, you know, that blend is there. Like the you know, Ford can feel very Indy, and I don't know. For me, it ended up working that you kind of didn't have Indy in the best places, and they were experimenting and talking and diving into some things that I was like, this could be interesting. And then the rest of the setup with the Dial of Destiny, I thought really, really worked. The second act of this movie is kind of like a washing machine cycle, where it's like, all right, we gotta go chase this thing. We get there, the villains get there. There's a scuffle. Then we get away. We gotta go chase the next thing, or go chase the same thing again, or whatever. And it's just kind of like a rinse repeat. And it's a very action-driven, very fast-paced second act. And I really felt like we lost story and we lost characters. We'll talk about some of the characters, but like Boyd Holbrook, a perfect example. I thought we were teeing him up for some cool things in the first act. And you really kind of start to lose him the rest of the movie, and that's some of the pitfalls that it has. But the thing I will say about the second act is that it feels like you're watching an Indiana Jones movie, or at least a movie that's trying to be an Indiana Jones movie. And I think it captures most of that vibe when it comes to the action. The chase sequences, I was just sitting there, I was like, yes, there are things where I was like, yo, what a cool way to do that, and that's totally a nod. But then there were other things where it was like, I feel like we just did this, and the only reason we're doing it again is so that we can make another nod. And it's the second act for me is like a little nostalgia overload that I don't think ultimately always helps the movie. However, some of those moments in the second act, I was like, yo, that was so cool. And then when you get to the third act, I really, again, think the things that haven't been working for me, and in the second act in particular, Helena, the character kind of not my favorite. She really starts to win you back in the third act, and she has a really wonderful moment, and the way things are building and where they're going, you start getting more invested and more engaged with the movie again, feeling similarly to what was going on with the first act. Then you get your big swing. I thought it worked. I thought with what they set up and what they ultimately did, I thought they hit the mark. Will it hit the mark for everybody? I don't know. But I enjoyed it, and it gives us really phenomenal stuff, specifically for Ford, where he's doing some of his best work in the third act, and same for Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who's doing some of her best stuff in the third act. And the cap on the movie, it was just the perfect way to end it. And again, it was one of the reasons I didn't want to like review it right out of the theater, because I was really riding high because I liked the way the movie ended. But ultimately, I think Mangold puts together a really good-looking movie. Which is not shocking, and really did capture the essence of Indy in those action sequences, even if there is a little bit of a rinse and repeat cycle to them. It always is looking good. It's just, I think the script wanted to try to do its own thing while being an Indiana Jones movie, which you see a lot in the first act and a bit in the third act. And then the second act just feels like it wanted to be an Indiana Jones movie the way that the fans were expecting it and what you were looking for. And ultimately, while I think you'll walk out satisfied, you're going to have a good time, you're going to have fun, it doesn't quite reach the peaks that it could have had the script done a little bit more work in the second act and worked with its characters a little bit better. And I guess that'll be a good transition into the cast. And like I said, Harrison Ford, I love him. I'm so glad Indiana Jones is back. I had such a good time with him, even if he was a little bit grumpier than normal. Like I said, it's one of those things that just feels natural, and you can feel the love Harrison Ford is pouring into this movie every single frame that he is in. And while some of the stuff that goes on with Indy is a little ridiculous, and I wish it would have played more into the tone of the beginning of the movie, it's just always fun to be with Indy, and this is one of those, like I said, it feels like a classic Indy movie, and we have a lot of fun with what's going on, and seeing Ford, do the historical thing and piecing things together and doing the things that, help him get to where he's got to go. Like, all of that was still there, and I was very happy about that. Phoebe Waller-Bridge, I think she's got good chemistry with Harrison Ford. I think some of their banter and back and forths feel classic and feel right. However, she's got her own agenda in this movie, and that didn't always mesh. And there are times where the character, specifically in the second act, is super annoying. And it was one of these where that was one of those things that was kind of losing me a bit. But to Waller-Bridge's credit, I think when you get into the end of this movie, she has a couple moments that really redeem the character and her performance, where I was like, all right, cool. I'm glad at least we landed there, even if the ride getting there didn't always mesh with me. And the other thing that was attached to her that I didn't love was this kid, Teddy. And Teddy's basically her short round. And for me, he's also kind of annoying. And he's just kind of there. And he does some things, and it's fine. But there's a bit, specifically in the second act, where Indy's just kind of like, oh, I know a person. And we go and we see someone that we know. Or, oh, I know another person that we don't know, but it feels like Indy definitely worked with that person, and in that way we do know them. And it just felt like we needed the real short round, and getting this kind of sidekick wannabe for maybe a future Indiana Jones series that follows Waller-Bridge, which I don't think I would want. I just would have liked the real guy, and especially with everything going on with Key right now, that would have been the most satisfying of all of the callbacks or nods or nostalgia moments if Key shows up. Spoilers, he doesn't. I think everybody knows that, but it's one of those things where you got this kid Teddy played by Ethann Isidore. I don't think the kid does necessarily a terrible job. I just didn't love the character. Then, like I said, there are some folks that get dropped in here too that we definitely know of, so I don't spoil any surprises. Antonio Banderas, look, he's not somebody that comes from the other movies, but he felt like a guy that Indy would go to. And then, of course, John Rhys Davies. It was so nice to have him back, and that was one of the things that drove me nuts when it came to some of these things where it was like, it was there. We could have had a lot of John Rhys Davies, and they opted not to. And he looked and he sounded like he was up for the gig, and it kind of makes sense, but again, just criminally underused. And the peak of criminally underused for me is Boyd Holbrook. I think this dude stands out in everything he does. I always love Holbrook. And in the first act, what they're doing with Kleber, I was really digging it, man. And how he connected to Mads Mikkelsen's Dr. Voller, I thought really, really worked. And then he's just kind of there the rest of the movie with nothing to really do. And that was kind of disappointing. And the same thing kind of happens with Toby Jones. I loved his Basil Shaw and his relationship with Indy, and with those flashbacks, I wanted more of that. That was my biggest thing with most of the cast, is there are some really good performances in here that I just wanted more of, or more time with. And last but not least, of course, is Mads Mikkelsen, Dr. Voller. Look, this is classic Mads Mikkelsen. Would it be cool to see someone else do a role like this? Sure. But if you give it to Mads Mikkelsen, you're going to get exactly what you came for, and he knocks it out of the ballpark, as you would expect. I think him and Ford are probably the two best things in the movie, and they really are a good counter for each other. But again, even Voller gets lost a little bit in the shuffle as second act, where it's just like, you show up and you do a thing, you show up and you do it again, you show up and do it again. I would have liked to have dived into that more, specifically with his relationship with Indy. I mean, there are things that happened in the prologue and we don't really ever address or mention, and it felt like there should have been more animosity and a more personal connection between the two that don't quite hit. Well, that had me kind of like about midway with this movie. And then there's the John Williams score. And this is the thing that puts the movie into a solid indie entry for me, and something that I think is a lot better than Crystal Skull, even if it doesn't reach the upper echelon of the original trilogy. John Williams, besides Harrison Ford, is probably having the most fun in this whole freaking movie, man. How he plays with the indie score, and where he brings the classic beats in and out and blends them with some of the new stuff that he's doing. It's just fantastic, man. Like, every moment I was like, ooh, John Williams, I'm so glad you are back, and I love when you're doing your thing. So yeah, I think that Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny could have been a great movie, but it's a good movie, and it's a good Indiana Jones movie. It's a fun Indiana Jones movie more than anything else, and you know, it's a little disappointing that it doesn't quite get all the way to where it could have been great. But this is definitely a way better outing. So let's get the Sea Maniacs up. Like I said, I really dig the beginning of this movie, the prologue, despite some of the wonkiness with some of the visual effects. I thought was the most indie. The first act setup and how we tee up the Dial of Destiny and what we're chasing, I thought really, really worked. I thought the second act had a lot of great action, but not a lot of great substance. And then the third act really came back to some interesting conversations and ideas and played with some things that I was like, you know what, that was kind of cool, and I like the way that looked and how that ended up working. And when we get to the ultimate end of the movie, I was super satisfied with what we got. So I'm gonna go 3.5 out of 5. The potential to be great was there, and it doesn't feel like it missed it by too much, but it does miss it. But it is, I think, if you're an Indiana Jones fan, a movie that's totally worth seeing, specifically in the theater. And that is what I want to know from you guys. If you haven't seen the movie, are you going to go see it in the theater? Are you going to see it with your parents? Or are you going to go, if you grew up with these movies, you're my age or my parents' age, are you going to go on like a date night with someone else that grew up with those, whether it's your significant other, or, you know, just go out with some friends? Is it one that you recently grew up with Indiana Jones? How'd you get into Indiana Jones? And what are you going to do? Like I said, theater or wait for streaming? And then if you saw the movie, how big of an indie fan are you? If you're not a big indie fan, what made you come out for this one? How'd you get into indie, like I said? And what worked and didn't? I don't think this is going to hit for everybody, but I think more Indiana Jones fans should be happy with this compared to what happened with Crystal Skull. So anything you got, man, good, bad, indifferent on Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, put it down below in the comment section. I look forward to talking to you down there. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you're new, you want to come hang out with C-Man anytime we're talking movies, TV, trailer, reactions, you want to be here for my Secret Invasion coverage. I got some stuff to work on there. Just anything else that's out in the world. I got some movies I got to catch up on, like Elemental. You want to know my thoughts, you dig my vibe, you want to show a little love and support, well, hey, come join C-Maniac Nation, where all those things can happen. It's super easy. Jump over there, hit the subscribe button, hit that little bell if you want those alerts. And until next time, for the C-Man Cinema Sit Down, I've been the C-Man. I'm signing off. Peace! Oh, you guys are still here. You snuck up on me. You must be looking for more of this guy. Well, I got 2 video options for you, man. Right up here and right over here. And if you want all those C-Man goodies, well, hey, come join the squad right on over there, and I'll catch you on the next one.